Hi, I'm Jonathan Treussard, and welcome to Treussard Talks, where we talk about the mechanics of investing, the psychology of investing, and what it means to manage your wealth with purpose. Because understanding your wealth shouldn't be as complex as building it. Welcome to today's show. And Rhodes, Dave Haughton, thanks for being on the show today. You guys have a distinctly special background in that you are both trained lawyers and you are passionate about what you do today, and it's not a second career as a baker. So let's start at the top. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Ann Rhodes. I'm Chief Legal Officer at Wealth.com, and I am an estate planner by background. So I worked at several large law firms before coming to Wealth. One of them is called McDermott, Will & Emery. I practice in their Manhattan office. And then the second one is Perkins Coie, which, yes, has been in the news quite a bit lately, but in their San Francisco office. And I will say my practice had nothing to do with the political law group.
I see a flag behind you. It sounds like we have something in common. Tell me more.
That's right. So I am actually a French citizen. I'm now a dual citizen. There's a whole backstory about how I came to be a U.S. citizen, but I am French by birth, and I grew up there for 11 years before my parents moved to Boston. They really wanted me to go to Harvard. That was a big joke on them because I didn't go to Harvard.
I hear you went to another underperforming school.
Exactly, to Yale. And actually, my first year, freshman year of college, my mom purchased Crimson for everything. It was very awkward for me. Her big dream was that we would learn English and go, to the best school that she had heard of. And so that's why we moved to Boston. It was supposed to be a 2-year stint. And then we just fell in love with the city, which Dave will sympathize with.
Oh, I love it. Well, as we were discussing, we have deep ties into Boston on this side of the mic as well. My wife is from Brookline. She's a Brookline high school girl. I went to BU. My father-in-law is a BU professor. And in fact, one of my nieces is at Harvard right now. Dave, I want to hear about you.
Though I am an estate planning attorney, me and Ann have quite different backgrounds, which I think is good. I think it gives us some diversity of experience. And so, for the beginning of my career, I was an estate planning attorney in Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire for the better part of a decade. There, I went to Commonwealth Financial Network, which, like Ann said, her firm was in the news. My firm is in the news quite a bit now, too. Massachusetts native, I'll probably always be here. I don't know that anything could pull me away. I'm born and bred. Everyone knows I'm just the stereotypical Boston guy, Celtics, Bruins, Red Sox, Patriots.
You guys have mentioned Wealth.com a couple times. And again, this conversation really isn't about Wealth.com per se. But given that you have mentioned it a couple times, can you give us just the 30-second version of what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So Wealth.com is an estate planning platform, a technology platform that is designed to cover the entire net worth spectrum from mass affluent all the way up to ultra high net worth. There are tools available to help clients with their estate planning that could be helping them get their documents in place. So revocable trust, wills, powers of attorney, healthcare documents, ticking up that really dire stat that only about 33% of people have an estate plan in place. We're trying to revolutionize estate planning, democratize estate planning to make sure that more people have an estate plan in place. Also, we have tools available for people who have existing estate plans. They're able to visualize those documents. So using artificial intelligence, you could upload an existing estate plan and be able to get within minutes a detailed summary that shows exactly what the details of that estate plan is. And from there, you can model it out with nice flowcharts and also be able to provide scenario analysis as far as showing, okay, what's the potential tax liability or what's your potential administrative costs, whatever the case may be, how much is going to reach the beneficiaries, and how can we optimize that, maybe reduce some of the taxes and increase what's going to ultimately reach the beneficiaries.
Got it. Yeah, as with most things in life, not making a decision is inherently making a decision. So even though you say 33% of people have a plan, everybody has a plan. It may not be the plan you want or the plan that you're intentional about. But as certain as taxes and death are, it strikes me that we're all going through the estate process at some point.
I say that all the time as well. It's not actually accurate to say that only 33% of people have a plan. Everyone has a plan. It's just, did you create the documents or did your state legislature decide what your plan is for you?
So, Anne, you're the chief legal officer, is that correct?
That's correct.
Which, it's funny because when you think about any other company, the chief legal officer tends to be kind of the in-house attorney.
Yes.
But of course, in the world that you guys inhabit, the chief legal officer really is much more akin to what I would view as an investment professional as the chief investment officer, right? Because you're actually the central nervous system of how this works, how this operates, what's driving the machine and the technology. Would you say that's accurate?
That is accurate. And it's funny you should say that because when I look back at the decision that I made about 4 years ago to jump ship from a law firm to wealth.com, at the time, we still hadn't had our MVP yet. We hadn't put anything out there in the market, and we just knew we wanted to be in the digital estate planning space. And I wouldn't have jumped if not for a company where I not only get to be thinking about business issues and risk management and kind of the traditional role of a GC, but actually really being on the front lines, building product with really sharp minds like Dave and some of my colleagues at Wealth, but also getting to be out here and talking about what it is that I do because we are a legal tech company. And so for us, it's interesting because I think all of us kind of wear this non-traditional hat for attorneys within startups. We very much are the subject matter experts on any product that gets rolled out of Wealth. And I have quite a large team for a company of our size to be able to put out the best products that we can. And so that part of the job is really cool. Like every day when I turn on my computer and I hand my little baby off to my nanny, I absolutely love everything that I do. And so any given day, I might be reviewing contracts and thinking about unauthorized practice of law, which is a very big compliance issue for us, and making sure that not only we are compliant, but also any advisors on our platform. But I also get to just design really cool products. And so that part of it is the best.
That's so fun. Yeah, so let's get in there. And as you guys know, I tend to talk about the 3 pillars of money, the 3 pillars of wealth as everything having to do with mechanics of money, having to do with the psychology of money, and of course, the purpose of it all. Because as I go back to regularly, we're not living our lives to end up with a pile of money. We're not living our lives to have the best estate plan in place. We're living our lives, and hopefully, whatever resources we bring to the task is a place to be empowered. So let's start with mechanics. And Dave, you started touching on some of these things, but when you think about the essential documents of estate planning and the basic strategies that everybody should understand and perhaps may choose to engage in regardless of wealth level, what are those?
Yeah, part of it's going to depend on your age and net worth. I think everyone should have a financial power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney, at the very least. Even starting when someone's 18 years old, they should have an estate plan in place. And a lot of people don't understand how that could be the case because they're still living under their parents' roof potentially. They're still on their health insurance. They're still claimed as dependents on the parents' tax return. But a lot of people don't realize once you reach the age of majority in your state, which is usually 18 years old, parents really technically, legally can't keep making decisions for you like you've been used to your entire lives. So children go off to college and something happens, something befalls them, they become incapacitated, they're unable to make their own decisions. Technically, legally, the parents may not be able to make decisions for them unless they go to court and ask for a judge's permission, which is obviously something that could take a lot of time and can be really burdensome. So even as young as that, having powers of attorney in place to name, usually if you're that young, naming your parents as your legal person who's in charge, either as agent under a power of attorney or healthcare proxy, to make decisions for you is really important. Then as you start going along in time, you get a little bit older, you start thinking about different priorities, like when you have children. Now that's where it's really critical that you have a will in place that names guardians who will care for your minor children if something were to happen to you. It'll also lay out what happens as far as distribution of your assets. That might not be the top priority because you might not have accumulated the wealth to be super concerned about that yet. And then as time goes on, you get a little bit older. Now we're thinking more about, well, what happens when I pass this wealth on to my children or to my beneficiaries? How are they going to manage it? How can I control that? And that's when you probably more start thinking about not just a will to manage that, but also a revocable trust. So a revocable trust is an important tool to where you can avoid probate and make sure, which probate is the legal process that can be time consuming. It involves the court and it can cost a lot of money. A revocable trust is a way to avoid that. And it's also a way to put yourself in the driver's seat to kind of control how distributions are going to work so that things come out tax efficiently and you're protecting from things like creditors and if the beneficiary were to get a divorce and potentially estate taxes between spouses. So as you grow both not only in sophistication, but in net worth and age, the priorities are going to change. The documents that you need are going to change.
At the end of the day, what you're hearing, I think, is because your priorities will change based on what estate planning document is important to put in place at the time that you're doing it, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, meaning have an estate plan in place. Make sure you get the thing that matters to you most in place for now, and then later revisit the things where you were like, I'm just going to make a decision that feels right now, but isn't necessarily a long-term decision. I think too often for people, they think, well, number one, I've gotten away with not having an estate plan for 40, 50, 60 years. What's another month?
Yeah, this is working.
Yeah, this is working. It's slipping until it doesn't anymore. And then for other folks, it was such a hurdle to even get to the estate plan and signing 10 different documents. You're like, ugh, I don't want to do it for another 15 years. So it better be right for the next 15 years, right? And so I have to get everything perfect and somehow be able to anticipate what could happen in my life for 15 years. And that's kind of not the right mindset either. So I think folks get stopped from having an estate plan both on the front end and the back end, thinking about future-proofing it. But that's not the right mindset. Just get it done so that the thing that matters today is right, and then come back and revisit it, because there are ways to make that faster and smoother and cheaper these days, and you don't want to miss the boat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And particularly, I mean, look, Dave, where you started, which probably is everybody's worst nightmare as a parent. Your kid goes off to college. I don't care if it's playing sports or at a party, they suffer an injury, they end up in the hospital. You walk in only to realize that you're not in charge, right? And so at that point in time, going back to Anne's point about what's the most important, having the ability to make medical decisions on behalf of your 18, 19-year-old seems business critical, mission critical, right? Everything else can wait type of thing. That seems to me really important. And the way, Anne, you're describing it is a function of how we got here in terms of how we've done estate planning in the past. It's such an involved process. It's not a cheap process. And it being kind of low tech, once you've walked into the person's office, you've signed a million documents, you've handed them tens of thousands of dollars, you're like, I'm not doing this again. Like, I'm good. Thank you very much. As opposed to kind of thinking of it as a living, breathing part of your life. And Dave, I'm not an estate person. I don't pretend to be one on TV for all the obvious reasons. I try to explain probate to people. I go back to my French grandmother. And my French grandmother had literally, you would lift anything up in her house, every little trinket and tchotchke, and there would be like a little sticky note that would like, this is what it is, when I bought it, and who it's going to, right?
Yeah.
And so when I talk to people about probate, I say, think of all the assets in your life as either having sticky notes on them or not having sticky notes on them. And some of them are kind of baked in, right? The beneficiaries on your financial accounts. Well, that's pretty clear. That's a pretty solid sticky note. And then there are things you're walking around with that just don't have sticky notes on them. And at someone's going to have to make a decision as to who it's going to, right? Yep. And that's the process of probate. Would you say that's a reasonable description for a non-attorney?
I love that. That's great. I might use that myself. because it is a difficult concept to explain for a couple of reasons. Probate, essentially what it is, it's the legal process of transferring property from a decedent to their beneficiaries. You can avoid it by contractually, right? You can avoid it by making sure it either goes through a trust, which is technically a contract, or it goes by beneficiary designation, which is a contract with the custodian of whoever's holding that property. And it's really important. It can depend on the state you're in. Some states, probate's more burdensome than others. I'm in Massachusetts. Nobody wants to go through probate in Massachusetts. It is a nightmare, and believe me, I've seen it myself. So, in other states, it might not be as burdensome. People might not be as concerned about it. But they have to realize that it is a legal process. It does involve the court. And when the court's involved, that can create administrative burdens, can create costs, can create delays. And so it's really important to realize that. The other thing about probate is not just at death, right? Probate could be during lifetime. If I have a beneficiary designation on my brokerage account, I'm going to avoid death probate. It's true, right? That's a way to avoid death probate. However, if you become incapacitated during your lifetime and that account is not in trust, then the only way that someone you trust or someone you love can access that account to make decisions for you is either through a power of attorney or through the lifetime probate process, where you would have to actually go to court and say, hey, I would like to be appointed as guardian or conservator to be able to access that property. So a lot of people think about estate planning and probate only in the context of death, but it's really important to realize that many people don't just fall dead immediately. A lot of them become incapacitated first, or at periods of incapacitated far before their death, obviously. And having a plan in place both during lifetime and at death for probate is really important.
I will say this about the powers of attorney. It's actually not because you're incapacitated necessarily, too. You can make a power of attorney immediately effective because you trust your spouse or you trust your sibling or whoever is going to be your agent to not abuse that. That power of attorney can become useful even if you're unavailable for whatever reason to sign a document. And these days, think about it as anything that you need notarized. So like you purchase a home, you decide to open a line of credit or a mortgage on your home or something like that. That happened to me actually just last summer. So I purchased a property in California with my husband. Our second baby was coming, so we just needed a bigger house, typical millennial transaction at this stage. And he happened to be away for work. And the California notary was like, well, if you want to close on the house now or in the coming week, I got to do this here in California. And he was not in California. So at that point, I happened to be an estate planner. So I had all my documents and I made sure that they were immediately effective. But I pulled out my power of attorney. We didn't have to go and chase down a notary the day of. We sent it across to the bank and said, is this appropriate for what we want to do? And the only inconvenience to me was that, signing something as an agent using a power of attorney, it was like so much writing. It was like signing on behalf of my husband as an attorney in fact, But I got it done all by myself.
It's amazing. Well, yeah, again, it's a mechanism to be empowered.
Exactly.
Right? And to have control, whether it's because someone's undergoing surgery and they're out of the loop for a couple of days or they're on a business trip. All those things happen. How do you think about the transition to estate planning, the mechanics of estate planning as wealth grows, the complexity of your financial life grows, the reality of potential estate taxes down the line becomes a thing, all of that?
Yeah, wealth should not be determinative for whether or not you have an estate plan. You can pass away with $2,000 or with $200 million, and there's a potential for your family to disagree about what should have happened. Now, $200 million, Uncle Sam and probably your state think that they also have some say over where your money goes, and those would be taxes, estate taxes. I once took a cab ride in DC, and I got to chatting with my cab driver about what I do. And she said, my mom just passed away and left 3 daughters and a son. And the one thing that all of us cared about was this fur coat that she had. And so, my sisters and I were chatting about who should get it. This is like Solomon, King Solomon and the baby, right? You can't split a fur coat. And then it turns out her sister-in-law went into the house, took the fur coat. And then it was like, well, are we going to sue her? Like, are we fight over this thing? It's not worth it because the attorney's fees or the small claims, whatever. So the coat was gone. And so it's the type of thing where you have to understand that if you don't have an estate plan or it's outdated, that there are decisions in there that you would have made differently and that now don't get reflected in your document. And this can be as simple as, honestly, those tchotchkes, that your French grandmother had. Under default law, nobody's going in there and being like, well, first, with your family heirlooms, have a round robin system for deciding which grandkid gets the jewelry or whatever. No, nobody's making that decision. It's usually 100% or equal shares to specific types of people. And the hierarchy is actually different depending on your state. Some states are good about taking into account blended families and the fact that maybe you have kids from a previous marriage and you have a surviving spouse. Some states are not, honestly, and the surviving spouse might just walk away with everything. And then all of a sudden, your kids from a previous marriage just have to pray and hope that they get along with their stepmom. And so that's the type of thing where, like, if you really thought about it, I think every single one of us would change something about those default rules.
Yeah, it's such a good point. Like, my father passed away a couple of years ago. He was a decorated Marine. He was a war hero, so he has medals. And you think about it, the way that the law is set up, that is split in equal shares. Let's say if my mother wasn't living, to me and my two brothers, it has no monetary value. But to us, it is the most valuable thing that he could possibly leave. Now, luckily, I have a great relationship with my brothers. I'm not worried about that. But you could see how that could really tear apart because you certainly can't sell it. And it has no value to it as far as being able to split it up. And it's just, those are the types of things like Anne was describing where it doesn't necessarily come down to $1 million here, $1 million there. It could be something that actually only has intrinsic value. It actually doesn't have monetary value. And how are you going to split it up? And if you don't detail those wishes, how is that going to cause dispute? And often, I would say, it is those things that have intrinsic value that cause the most dispute.
Thanks for listening. I'm Jonathan Treussard, founder of Treussard Capital Management. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to start receiving my free newsletter, Wealth Empowered, or if you'd like to learn more about me and Treussard Capital Management, go to Treussard.com. That's TREUSSARD.com. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Maybe that actually is a natural transition into the psychology of things, right? I mean, there is so much psychology and family dynamics. And I find that a lot of people just aren't willing to engage in this conversation and be proactive. And a lot of it is just having to face this yuck, right? Which is, I don't think anybody wants their family to kind of tear each other apart when you're gone, but you kind of facing the reality, which is at that point, it's not your problem anymore, as opposed to actively engaging with it now and having to make these determinations and decisions and hopefully educating the people around you about them, because it's one thing to have a document. It's another one to actually then be like, hey, party people, this is the plan. I just had a conversation with someone I really love and respect, Jolene Godfrey, about raising financially fit kids and having healthy family dynamics around wealth. And there's such a drive to just not go there. But if you don't go there, everybody's starting to play the movie inside their own head, right? So tell me more about that psychology, the movie inside their head.
I mean, I think it's a really good point. It's really critical because what happens is if you're not communicating and you don't have a plan in place, when someone passes away, it's a very raw time. There's a lot of emotions and you really want to grieve. You want to celebrate that person. Typically, you have a really good reflection of that person's lifetime. You have great memories. And when that person did not plan and they created a situation potentially where there's conflict, it can really sour a legacy because that's where your mind is drawn to, is all this dispute that happened after they passed away because you didn't have the ability to honor them and really think about their lifetime and their legacy and think of the good memories. So I think about that quite often, that A lot of people don't realize that because obviously estate planning is a thing that you put off literally to the end. It's literally the last thing you have to worry about because you're gone, right? But after you're gone, that's when everyone has to deal with it. And I would far rather, as a family member, be able to grieve and honor that person than have to deal with, oh, now I need to file this paperwork. Now I just found out that my brother is disinherited from this account, but not that account. And now they're upset about it. And it can just really sour a legacy. So that's really where mine goes with it is you're not just planning for the assets. You're not just planning for taxes. You're also helping to make sure that your legacy isn't tarnished. And you're also helping your family have a more smooth transition in the grieving process without having to go through a lot of stress.
Here's what I would say also to piggyback off of what Dave is saying. Think about it this way as well. There's a statistic out there that the number one reason why somebody does an estate plan is because a family member around them has done their estate plan, talked about it, and convinced them that it would be a good idea for themselves. So even if you're not ready to do an estate plan for yourself, but you have a parent, an older parent, and you worry about what the family looks like for yourself, because you're still going to be alive when they're gone. This is about you, not just I'm going to be gone, who cares? When your parents and that generation is gone, do you have concerns? Because you know that you think about potentially money or healthcare decisions differently from your siblings or a spouse that the parent has, right? So this is like an in-law or stepmom, stepfather. Like, is there a reason for you to think about their estate planning and making sure that they're buttoned up as well, so that what's left behind for you is going to be a moment where, yes, there's grief and all those things, but at least there's clarity about what happens to, who makes the decisions for that person and who gets what. And so I would challenge you also to think about doing your own estate plan, because you might influence that person to do theirs as well and make it kind of like a generational conversation. And I think those can actually feel very fulfilling as well.
I love that so much. There is so much in that insight in terms of leading by example and the public good aspect of taking care of your side of the street type of thing. And again, I think for me, it always comes down to this thing, which is the more we normalize this behavior, the more we normalize it for ourselves, the more hopefully we could normalize it for others and take some of the heat out of the conversation and take some of the awkwardness around money and around all these things out of the equation. I think that's brilliant, Anna. It's just so true. Anybody who's even marginally community-minded, if your actions can lead somebody else to take care of their own stuff for their own reasons and their kids and all of that, I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. What's the number one reason you feel that people really don't want to go there? They refuse to, it's not quite like not filing your taxes, but it's pretty darn close.
I don't think that's that bad of an example, actually. I think it is procrastination. I think it's everyone knows they need to file their taxes, and then they have a deadline, and they do it because they have to, and they know it's something they have to do. I highly doubt if you polled most of America, everyone would say, should you have an estate plan? I would think that even though only 33% of people have an estate plan, I would think that 90% would say, yes, I probably should. But there's no deadline, right? There's no specific deadline for them to do it. I think procrastination is by far and away the number one reason people don't plan. I mean, yeah, you can get into things like cost and complexity, and there's certainly other factors that cause procrastination, but I think procrastination is number one.
And I do think cost factors into it. If you've started calling attorneys and they quote, here in California, it's probably at this point like $5,000 to $7,000 for a couple to do their estate plan. You're thinking, man, with that $5,000 to $7,000, I want to be doing some work on the house and making sure that I leave more wealth to my kids rather than, I have ways to spend that money, right? And so I think that can also be a huge pain point for people as well. I don't know how you solve for that other than going to your financial advisor, if that's Jonathan, and talking about what your choices might be. These days, there are all sorts of ways to get an estate plan in place in a pretty cost-efficient manner. So there's sometimes legal insurance offered through your employer, the way that you might have health insurance. There are ways like wealth.com to go and do your estate plan digitally in a way that is very consumer friendly and also cost effective with really decent quality documents. And so go and explore that, but don't let cost actually be the reason you're not having an estate plan in place.
I completely agree. I really like to think about purpose and the why behind all these things. It seems to me like once you actually bring in purpose, then everything starts to make sense. And as we think about particularly the estate planning conversation, I mean, Dave, you talked about honoring people's memory and being in a place to grieve and love and tell funny stories about remember the time when, all of that. But when it comes particularly to the people that have substantial wealth, substantial means, people talk about legacy and it means different things to different people. How does legacy, where does that live in the estate? I'm not even sure we're talking about estate planning, just this, philosophy of whatever that is.
I think it looms over everything. I mean, to me personally, I think it is the biggest part of estate planning. It's really why I do what I do. Yes, people have accumulated wealth. They want to pass it on. They want their children or their spouse to live comfortably or maybe live better than they grew up. But I find legacy to really be the overarching part of an estate plan because that's really what you're leaving behind. I talk about this a lot, and it's a story that I love to tell about legacy is that when I was growing up, we used to have mulch delivered to spread the mulch for the flowers. And we'd get it delivered in one big heaping pile. And what my dad would do is he would have that delivered directly under the basketball hoop. Because that was my favorite thing in the world to do was play basketball all day long outside. And his mindset was, okay, you can play basketball, but you got to move that mulch. So I think about that, move that mulch all the time when it comes to legacy, about my dad's mindset and how that's come onto me and how I think about that with my children. And I think that flows into an estate plan because if you want to follow through with those types of mindset, you might not want to dump your entire estate onto your kids when they're 21 years old, because you're going to de-incentivize them from moving that mulch, so to speak. They're going to get all this money. They're going to open a bar or buy an expensive car, and you're going to demotivate them from the thing that you think they should follow through with. Hopefully they don't make those decisions, but they're more likely to with a more immature brain. And so I think incorporating how do you want your legacy be and incorporating that into the documents and the way you draft the documents, the way you formulate your estate plan is really important.
It's beyond, I think, also just your family members and making sure that they're taken care of and that they're not going to make decisions that you wouldn't have agreed with. I also think, and especially for folks who don't have kids, all of a sudden it feels like, who do I give my money to? The world all of a sudden is your oyster in some ways. There's no natural beneficiary. That's where you can be actually quite creative about defining your legacy. This is where, for example, other family members, you can think of who you get along with and who shares similar ideals or values, passions, and leaving them something that will matter tremendously to them. So I had clients, for example, who wanted to pay off the student loans for their nieces and nephews when they themselves didn't have kids. So that's really, truly meaningful to a family member. And then there are those who, of course, are incredibly involved in their communities because they don't have to chase after their kids all the time and attend, college parent day or something. But they're incredibly involved in their local communities. And they want to leave a significant gift to a charity that they've been involved with, or even honestly taking care of their pets to make sure that their companions are taken care of. So that's a type of thing where I think about if you're gone, who will miss you? What shoes do you fill today? And what impressions do you want to leave behind?
I think that's beautiful because it speaks to the fact that we all find meaning in different places and in different ways. And obviously, for those of us who have kids, that becomes a natural conduit. The reality is we're all pursuing meaning in our own lives. And this is an opportunity to actually lean in and define it, which is, I think that's just beautiful. That's probably one of the most beautiful things you can do in life. That's awesome. I love this conversation, you guys. I have a series of questions to close our time together. Now, Anne, you're French-born, but you left relatively young, so I'll forgive you for not knowing the origin of these questions. But there was a TV show when I was growing up that Bernard Pivot hosted, which was a literary show. And he asked a series of questions to all of his guests, and that series of questions was adapted into American TV by James Lipton of the Actors Studio. Now, we have two guests, so we're going to have to take turns. Anne, I'm going to invite you to take the first turn on the first question, and then Dave, you'll go first on the second one. We're going to try to go for some degree of equity here. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
Ready.
I'm nervous, but ready.
What is your favorite word?
Oh, my favorite word is privacy. And here's the reason why. What I've come to realize, because I potty trained a toddler last year, is that I think every single human has an innate need for being a social being, and being around your family, your pack, your crew. But every single human being also has a sense that they need some personal space, some privacy, things that should not be touched by anybody else. So my toddler and I actually talk a lot about privacy and what's hers and what she gets to keep as her little secret box and whatnot, but also during potty training, bodily privacy. And I think that's really important for estate planning as well, that there are certain things that, maybe others don't have a right to know about how you lived your life and who your assets go to. So that's my favorite word right now.
My favorite word is bravery, I would say. A lot of reasons for that, but I'll just leave it at that. My favorite word is bravery.
Well, that's wonderful. What is your least favorite word? Dave, you want to go first?
My least favorite word would be cheese. I don't like cheese. Cheese is gross to me.
You're winning, no fan.
Yeah, do you know who we are?
I could have a much more poignant word to say, but that is the thing that people know me for very well, is that I don't eat cheese. And I have a deep aversion to it. So it's probably my least favorite word.
All right. You got to redeem us on this one.
Yeah, no, chores. Who does what every day in a household? I don't like to think about them. I don't like to divvy them out. I don't like to talk about it with my husband or my kids. It's just like Sisyphus over here.
All right, next one. What is a sound or a noise you love, Anne?
Oh, this is just so easy for me. Right now, my youngest has started giggling and having so much fun, and she's starting to move her body in a different way because she's starting to want to walk. She's about 10 months old. And when she gets to pull herself up or take that first step, she's just giggling all the time. So her giggles.
What about a sound or a noise you hate?
For me, it would probably be ambulance or fire truck alarms. And because I work from home fully, and I live in a city, so there's constant street noise, but particularly that one. And of course, my podcast recordings, meetings get interrupted by all these noises. And it's constant. But thankfully today, no such noises. So you're lucky.
So far, let's see what happens. I like it. All right. Who would you like to see on a new banknote?
So I will say this. I really liked Mitt Romney. So I know I'm steering into politics. I was very sad when he retired. He was my governor when I was in Massachusetts. And then, of course, he moved to Utah. I think we need more people who are willing to stand up for their values and not always toe party line. So Mitt Romney is my answer.
Dave, you've got a Massachusetts governor over here, so.
Who would I want on a banknote? Can I say Larry Bird?
You totally can say Larry Bird.
It's Larry Bird then. Larry Legend. If I could choose anyone in the world, that's who I got to go with.
Very cool. I'm going to ask you one last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
That I was a good mom.
Oh, my goodness. You made your dad proud.
Talk about legacy, right? Just all around.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, this was wonderful. I'm so grateful we had this conversation. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
This podcast is for entertainment and education only. Nothing here is financial advice. Treussard Capital Management is a registered investment advisor. Please visit our website, www.treussard.com, for additional information and disclaimers.